Okay, so No Thoughts Head Empty is a popular meme and perhaps a rallying cry for Gen Z, amassing 17.6 million views on the hashtag No Thoughts Head Empty on TikTok, and its less popular but nonetheless worthy of note cousin, Head Empty No Thoughts, with 2.5 million views. There's been one article that I could find on this meme phenomenon by Wired in November, and it did actually quite a good job of discussing and analyzing this phenomenon. It wasn't so much centered around TikTok and mainly centered around the smooth brain meme and the return to monkey meme, both of which we will be touching on a little bit later. But I think this meme phenomenon of refusal of thoughts is really interesting and points to something in the collective Gen Z consciousness that refuses the incessant information overload of the internet and the overwhelm of these times. So what does this phrase even mean, and what is this phenomenon? Well, Head Empty No Thoughts arose as both a caption and a hashtag on TikTok and Twitter around mid-2020. Oftentimes, it's followed by a celebrity or a pop culture moment or a fictional character that is occupying the brain space that has been freed up due to said lack of thought. Sometimes this caption is usually prescribed to pets who, through staring blankly into the distance, make us all jealous with their ability to control, alt-delete their brain. There's also the proximate caption or phrase, no thoughts, just vibes, that expresses similar things. It can be expressed in both still images and videos, primarily on TikTok. Overall, this phenomenon as a caption expresses a desire for a simpler way of existing. With the famous smooth brain meme that was discussed in the Wire article, we can understand that the key of this desire for lack of thoughts is in the can't think, so no sad. Bimbofication also really arose in a big way on TikTok during 2020, in which the word bimbo was beginning to be reclaimed, in which there was a refusal to engage in critical thought, exude a dumb, hot persona. This is obviously not true because most of the TikTokers that are self-professed bimbos are actually really intelligent, smart people, but this persona flows along the same lines of refusal to think. I won't be really going into the whole bimbo aesthetic too much, and if you're looking for other information on it, Jordan Teresa has a really good video. This is saying something really important, and it makes sense that it arose in prominence within 2020. With all the tragedy of 2020, it's more than understandable that people desire to shut down their brain a little bit. We are on the edge of what feels like and probably is apocalypse in process, with capitalism's insistence on running this world into the ground and taking us all down with it, with everything from environmental degradation to the collapse of economies to governments that continue to fail us and systems that are not broken but in fact made from violence. It can feel like it's really exhausting to be alive. To hold all these things in our brain at once and figure out how to, on an individual level, cause the least amount of harm while existing within systems that are inherently harmful. To have statistics yelled at us about how many people are dying or sick or murdered, it's scary and overwhelming, and truly I feel like a lot of us desire to no think, so no sad. A lot of criticism has been coming up about how it's privileged to decide to simply not engage with the realities of this world. Although there is a lot of truth within this, I would like to offer that there is something much more complex happening here than just bratty, privileged Gen Z kids that are deciding to turn a blind eye to the problems of the world. Rather, I think that this No Thoughts Head Empty is not only pointing to a collective reaction of this time of information overload, but perhaps offering an interesting way to engage with change and revolution. If you're someone who checks their phone in the morning, by the time that you wake up in this messy, messy world, you are inundated with data and information. If you're someone who takes even a moderate interest in the realities of this world, a quick scroll on your social media feed, and all at once you're being asked to process environmental collapse, police brutality, someone posting a bikini photo, someone making a really delicious meal for themselves, and then a global pandemic, genocide, and white supremacy. In this age where information is so easily accessible, we are told that this is empowering, that being informed of the happenings of this world make us informed global citizens, that in fact this is what makes us good people, that if you're not outraged then you're not paying attention. So we pay attention, but there's just so much to pay attention to. We feel guilt that we're perhaps not doing enough, so we try to know everything as a way to displace our guilt, and the easy to read infographics don't seem to make us feel any better. When I was in my first year in university, I started to become more radically politicized before I realized that coffee was a huge catalyst to intense anxiety I had. So I literally spent the entire year on 3 cups of coffee in a manic state of booming realizations that the world that I was making my way through for 18 years of my life was fundamentally built on the exploitation and oppression of people. You know that meme where Charlie Day is like standing in front of the corkboard with all the papers behind him? That was like me for all of first year. I was an anxious wreck, and looking back on it, it was an important process within my own journey as a human being. And in a lot of ways, it was assisted by social media. I was super overwhelmed by all the information about the realities of this world. Instead of making me feel super empowered, it pushed me into states of paralyzing anxiety and apathy, feeling the intense weight of having to change the entire world on my shoulders. From people making bread to genocide on your feed, it's a lot. It creates almost this sense of flattening. Andrea Khôra, artist and researcher based in London, expressed in her zine On a Too Short Introduction to a Thick Present that the flattening occurs at an extreme moment of information overload, when value, meaning, and temporality collapse onto a single plane, when the perfect flower arrangement is equal to mass genocide. In fact, the more we are exposed to reports of brutal disaster and humanitarian crisis, the less we feel anything at all. With our feeds being crammed with both mundanity and horror, with some things small and other things too big for us to comprehend, our affective experience becomes flattened. In fact, the more genocide and murder become mundane. This TikTok was so interesting to me because I think it really perfectly encapsulates the experience of being on the internet now. Just like being thrown absolute horror and scariness of the world that we're living in, and then the next clip is just like her laughing at something funny. Like, it is so crazy. Our human brains are not equipped to handle all this information at once. This makes us feel less, not more. We disengage, and in a lot of ways, No Thoughts Head Empty clues us into this disengagement and the overwhelm of grind activism. A popular criticism, or perhaps assumption, about No Thoughts Head Empty is disengagement. As discussed before, with a world that is increasingly complicated and with all this information overload, we are being asked to hold all this complication within our brain at once. Again, No Thoughts Head Empty perhaps refers to a collective disengagement. In the overwhelm of the reality of this world, we choose to detach ourselves from it. And you know, perhaps there is some truth behind this, but disengage from what? I often notice that people who are posting this meme on TikTok or Twitter or whatever are quite radically and politically minded people. Obviously not everyone, but most of the time I find that these are the people who are actually quite engaged with the world and wanting to make it a better place. Rather, I think that this disengagement is more of a disengagement and perhaps an unconscious or maybe completely conscious refusal of not only information overload, but the intensity and urgency of grind activism. Okay, what do I mean by grind activism? Well, thanks for asking. It's a concept that I'm tentatively coining and would like to offer as a critique to the forms of activism that I've been observing that are not only counterintuitive to creating a loving, sustainable future, but are in fact using the tools reinscribed in capitalism. In my last video, I touched a bit on grind culture in relation to productivity, and there's a plethora of video essays and critiques of it online. But to quickly summarize, I would say that the meaning of grind culture is all in the word. It's this grinding down, this wearing away, this exhaustion of constant work. What is important too, but not often mentioned as a part of grind culture, is that the way that capitalism functions with the grind is that it makes it so even when we're resting, we are still working and being productive. For example, people get home from their busy 9 to 5s, which isn't actually a 9 to 5 because they're checking emails and doing work at home. Or if you're in school, you're going to class and studying, and you come home to unwind by scrolling on TikTok or your social media feeds. Even in this act of relaxation, you are still being productive for the economy, as your views and likes on videos and posts are giving these companies valuable data that they will use to make a lot of fucking money. Grind culture is always working even when you're relaxing. Inundating you with information is a key part of the way that capitalism works to hold your attention for as long as possible, in whatever form. On top of this, grind culture has the sense of urgency and insecurity, either literal material insecurity, as in if you don't work, you won't be able to survive, or a type of psychological insecurity. If you don't work, you're not worthy. Oftentimes it works with both. Okay, so what does this have to do with activism? Well, I often find, specifically with online activism, there can be parallels with grind culture. The surge of online activism demands that you pay attention, to be alert. I know we have long since retired wokeness because cringe, but even in the word woke, you have the same rhetoric. You can't sleep or rest. You must be vigilant and alert about what is going on in this world. I did want to say too that woke as word isn't like inherently cringe. I just think that the ways in which it's been appropriated by white people have been super cringy and has made the word super cringy. And again, I think that wokeness and woke has a long history within like Black experience, specifically in the US, and it really is kind of alluding to this vigilance that you need to have as a Black person living in the US, and I think that that is really important. And in that sense, that I think that it is really referring to a real like safety concern. But I guess what I meant by cringe was like the way that white people have appropriated it. There is a specific type of urgency to this alertness, this demand that we act now lest it be too late. There's naturally a real resulting insecurity we feel about our future and our safety. And to be fair, there is a lot of truth in this. There's a lot of crazy, horrific things going on in this world, and our refusal to engage with the suffering of others is a way in which we inadvertently perpetuate harm. And people of color, specifically Black folks, can't turn away from these realities in a real safety sense. The urgency is real. People are dying, and the world, with the help of multinational corporations, is being further and further destroyed. I don't want to negate people, specifically people of color's real feelings of anxiety and fear. Moreover, I'm not placing blame on the people who create activist content online. Rather, it is the rhetoric and way we engage with this material that is in itself still reinscribed within these systems of harm. As Audre Lorde famously expressed, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. Pushing people into urgency, insecurity, and fear is not how I think that we'll dismantle these oppressive systems or create new worlds that are loving and free. Berating people for not signaling they're engaging by posting on their stories or feeds, or constantly reposting really graphic and traumatic content that we are demanded to consume and consequentially makes us feel super numb. This fear, urgency, and insecurity is what capitalism perpetuates, and I fear that sometimes activism engages in similar behavior. Hey y'all, I wanted to make super clear that I'm not saying that this activist content in and of itself is inherently harmful. Rather, I think that the way that we are consuming it through these like really capitalistic platforms can be harmful, in the sense that I think that it is great that we are allowed to share content on a mass scale and share information on a mass scale, but this intense inundation of information overload doesn't allow us to have any type of critical or meaningful engagement with the issues of our world, and instead just makes us feel super overwhelmed and really lack agency instead of getting more agency. And yeah, I think that if we want to change this world for the better, I think we need to change the ways in which we're engaging with activism, specifically online, and to be able to like have meaningful understanding of the issues that are going on, and not just like constantly being inundated with very bite-sized small pieces of information that don't carry the complexity of what is actually happening. And similarly to grind culture, we experience a lot of burnout, because to rest would be to be complacent. And to return back to head empty, no thoughts, this is what I think the meme is sort of signifying. Perhaps before people have the full words to express how overwhelmed they feel with their attention being pulled in so many directions, and the intense anxiety they feel about the urgency and insecurity it expresses, head empty, no thoughts is this embryonic collective feeling that people have. Imagining how nice it would be to not have to think about all this stuff all the time. Have to be constantly pushed into fight or flight mode every time you turn on your phone. To deal with information overload and be simultaneously enraged, frightened, and numb. So if this ain't it, then what's the alternative? How can we be a part of changing the world for the better if we just simply disengage? That was a rhetorical question. I have an answer. And the answer is, I'm not completely sure. Again, I'm not saying that we should completely disengage. Rather, I think that having our thoughts constantly consumed with just resisting limits our possibilities to imagine new worlds that we want to create. These new forms, and in some way, old historical forms of activism, ask us to exist within a constant state of overwhelm and burnout. If we want to create things beyond the system, we have to move beyond its tools. Why no thoughts, head empty is sort of a radical way of engaging is that it imagines possibilities for freedom, a carefree existence in which we don't need to be constantly in survival mode or worried about the state of our world. There is a lot of freedom in an empty head. It is a state of existence in which we can just be. Now, you may be saying that this is not really practical because after all, we need to be changing our world and we should be worried about the state of it. And while yes, that's true, but we can't just keep existing within a state of reaction and panic with one disaster after another piling on top of our psyche. What no thoughts, head empty really does is offer us the possibility to access ease. And why is this important? Well, imagination and possibility are not just airy-fairy concepts, but something that is really critical in engaging with transforming and creating a new world. And ease allows us to not only literally imagine what we want this new world to look like, but what we want it to feel like. To literally embody the feeling of this new world in ourselves now. If we want this new world that we're creating to feel free and joyous and a place in which we can all be ourselves and live peacefully, ease allows us to tap into our freedom and joy and our sovereignty. This is more than just corporate self-care in which you buy a face mask and call that accessing your freedom. But really having moments in your day, in your week to exist, to shut off and be in states of deep rest and really no thoughts, head empty. To really feel in your soul the possibility of freedom that has been so restricted and under attack by capitalism and white supremacy. Or who knows, maybe it's just a funny meme and I'm reading into it way too much. But I don't think I am, and I think we all feel really overwhelmed and scared. No thoughts, head empty, I think is really saying something important and is signaling something that we are all collectively feeling. And I think that there are other possibilities to have beyond the ways in which we're engaging in activism online. I want to know that freedom is possible. I want to feel that freedom is possible. And I think that this is what ease signifies in a lot of ways. Anyways, that's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Peace out.